Life's circumstances sometimes can bring us to our knees, asking God to come to our help. Or when we're praying for good things, like healing for a loved one, freedom from sin patterns, a job, a spouse, a child, salvation. Yet at times, our good desires remain unfulfilled, because most of the times God's answer to our desperate cries is a capital no. We may never understand on this side of eternity the reasons God answers no when we so desperately long for a yes. Sometimes we cannot comprehend how His will align with the circumstances we are facing. I've come to learn that the problem is my limited understanding, not the truth of God's promises. J.I. Packer offers the following insights by saying, perhaps God meant to strengthen us in patience, good humor, compassion, humility, and meekness. Perhaps He has new lessons in self-denial and self-distrust to teach us. Or moreover, He wishes to break us of complacency or undetected forms of pride and conceit. Perhaps His purpose is simply to draw us closer to Himself. Or even more, perhaps God is preparing us for forms of service of which at present we have no inkling. At that time I pleaded with the Lord, O sovereign Lord, you have begun to show to your servant your greatness and your strong hand. For what God is there in heaven or on earth who can do the deeds and mighty works you do? Let me go over and see the good land beyond the Jordan, that fine hill country and Lebanon. Deuteronomy 3:23-25. From the portion of scripture we just read, we understand that Moses was imploring God to allow him enter the promised land. God, however, refused and instructed him in verse 27 to ascend a mountain so that he could see the land, hence he was not going to cross over to it. Sometimes, we desperately want something with all of our heart and soul. We plead with God over and over again, but in the end, He refuses to grant our request. How should we respond in this kind of situations? We can learn this through the examples of Moses and other Bible characters. You see, the promised land was Moses' dream, vision, and goal. And after all his hard work and all the complaining and the trouble he put up with, not only was he not allowed to enter the promised land, but was also instructed to support his successor, who would, Joshua. Imagine the disappointment of Moses at not being personally able to experience the fulfillment of God's promise. Here is a true character test of humility. Not only accepting that we won't have our heart's desire, but also being happy for those who will, and even encouraging them. King David's infant son, from his adulterous affair with Bathsheba, became gravely ill. David begged God to spare the child's life. He fasted and prayed and prostrated himself face to the ground all night. 2 Samuel 12:16. Nevertheless, the child died. How did King David respond to God's decision? In verse 20 of 2 Samuel 12, we read that when David learned that his child was dead, he picked himself up, washed off and anointed himself, changed his clothes, and went into the house of the Lord and worshipped. Then he went home and ate something. This is a picture of total acceptance to the will of God. David realized that God in His wisdom had made His judgment, and he accepted it, recognizing God's divine rule and sovereignty. In the New Covenant, we see an excellent example of perfect submission in Jesus Christ. He was met with the answer no from His beloved Father. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus asked if the cup of suffering could be taken from Him. My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. Matthew 26:39. Although Jesus was sorrowful and deeply distressed to realize the terrible suffering He would endure, even death on a cross, He submitted to the will of God, saying, O my Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. Matthew 26:42. The Bible tells us that, although He was a son, He learned obedience from the things which He suffered. What we learn from Moses, David, and Jesus is that, 1. There will be times when God's resounding no may cause us pain and sorrow. We must be humble enough to accept and submit ourselves to God's will, even when it most hurts. 2. We can also learn that God says no for a variety of reasons. For instance, in the case of Moses and David, the consequences of sin was involved. But in the case of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, there was but one way for the will of God, mankind's redemption from sin, to be accomplished. 3. We can also learn that if we graciously accept and trust God's answer of no, our trials may refine our character and make us more like Jesus Christ. May we all be wise and humble enough to recognize, accept, and submit when God is saying no.